everybody, it's Chari here, and I'm going to be making this rustic Christmas card today. I made this card here for a friend who asked for a Christmas card with a barn, and I thought it turned out really well, and I kind of wanted to expand on the idea and try to make something that looked even more rustic. So I'm going to be using the solid tree from this set and the barn from Critters on the Farm. And then I've got some wood grain papers here. These came from a 6x6 pad. I'm going to use the dark one for the background and the light one for the ground. These came from a My Mind's Eye 6x6 pad, but of course you could use any wood grain paper that you might have or could find at the craft store. So for the background or the sky, I'm going to be using the Snowy Backdrops die. It's going to cut the paper to the exact size of an A2 size card. So I'm just going to tape that down and run that through my die cut machine. And it's going to cut everything to the proper size that I need. So I've run that through my die cut machine, and I'm just going to peel it off here. And I actually like to use the Post-it note tape to help me grab things that aren't coming out of the die so well. You can always use the little pokey tool, but I've already got the tape there, so that seems to work pretty well for me. And I was just going to show you could actually use that to help pop out the little pieces that are staying in there as well. Just make sure it's a low tack tape. Now I've got a piece of, this is like a deco glitter paper from Tim Holtz. It has a backer paper on it, so it's got adhesive on the back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer that behind my die cut sky so that the stars and the snow are a very subtle silver glitter shimmer. So now I'm going to work on my pieces to create my little scene. I've got a piece of craft paper here. This is not the Nina Desert Storm. This is a little darker actually. I think this came from a pack that came from Michael's. It's more like a paper bag brown. And I'm going to stamp out the barn in the walnut ink. And then I'm going to stamp out some trees. And you can see I tested some trees down there at the bottom. The ones that are going to work the best on this dark colored paper is the Noble Fir and the freshly cut grass inks. I tried the celery stick, that's the one on the far left, and it was just kind of a little too muddy. You can really tell it's green on this brown paper. So I'm just going to stamp out those trees, and we will die cut those later. You could also use any kind of tree and color it in as well. But I'm going to do some colored pencils on this brown paper. So I'm speeding it up, and I've zoomed in a little bit here, and I like to use Prismacolor colored pencils. That's what I have. And they're really nice and thick and go on really thick. Now I'm not going on as thick or as hard with as much pressure to begin with. I'm just putting down a layer of the lighter red that I've picked out. And then I've got a darker red here, and I'm going to kind of go under the eaves of the barn and just give it a little bit of shadow. And then I can go back with the lighter, blend it a little bit. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm drawing lines, which they may be a little hard to see. You can see them in the photograph probably a little better, just to kind of simulate the lines of the barnwood. Now I'm going to color the roof, and I'm using 2 colors of gray. I believe these are warm grays. So that's the lighter color, and then I'm going to go in with the darker and just give it a little bit of shadow, a little bit more depth. And then I'm going to go and do the same thing on the doors here. And I'm not using anything I did a little cross braces like the doors would be, but I'm not using anything to blend it here other than the pencils themselves. And then the white, which really pops on this brown cardstock, just to add some highlights. But this is going to be sort of more of a night scene, so I'm going to tone down the white on the eave there a little bit. When I've got it like I want it, I'm going to use the coordinating die and cut my pieces out. So I'm going to cut out the little barn. I'm also going to cut out all the little trees as well. You could always cut these out by hand. And part of the reason why I went with the brown colored cardstock for my images is so that they are a little more rustic, not quite so clean and popping off the page as they would be with white cardstock, because these dies leave a little edge, and I didn't really want them to be framed in white because I'm kind of going for more of a night scene here. So that's why I decided to try the darker brown cardstock. So I forgot to turn my camera on, and while it was off, I put the deco glitter paper on my card base. I also cut out a little moon using the die that's from the snow globe set. You can see there I've cut it out. And then I'm going to layer this piece of wood grain paper that I've die cut over top. So I'm going to be using some Tombow Mono Multi liquid glue. I'm going to make sure that I put a line around all the edges. And then I'm going to give it a pretty good amount in between all the little circles there, just to make sure it's covered pretty well. And then I'm going to line it up and glue it down on top of that glitter. That was Penny, by the way, flapping her ears. You can see I've got a little bit of that glitter sticking out on the top there, and I'm going to kind of shave that off here in a minute before I put my other pieces on. I'm just arranging my little trees to figure out how I want this little scene to look. And then now I'm going to cut the ground. So I'm going to use a white wood grain here, and I'm using the stitch rectangle die that's the same size as the card, and I'm just going to cut the bottom portion so that it has a nice finished edge of the stitching. And now I can take one of the stitched hillsides that I want. I want the higher part of the hill on the right side where the barn is, because that's kind of the direction it faces. I'm just going to lay it on there and kind of position it around until I get it where I want it to be with where I want my barn. So I kind of want it to look like the barn sitting on the hill, and then the trees are going to be more behind the hill. And you'll see I'm going to trim them a little bit so that they're not all exactly the same size. So I've run that through my die cut machine. It's going to layer on the bottom just like that. But I wanted to give it a little bit of dimension. Actually, here's where I trim that little extra piece of glitter off. You want to do this before you start putting all the other things that you've worked so hard on there, just in case you mess it up. So now I don't have that piece shining through the side anymore. So I'm going to use, this is a thin foam tape. It's not as thick as the normal stuff. It's a little thinner, but you could always use the thick stuff. I just didn't want this card to be too bulky. So I'm just doing this so that the ground kind of pops up from the background a little bit. And it'll also give me some space to tuck the trees behind it. So I'm just going to line up the bottom using my desktop. And now I can start to put my pieces together. So I'm going to put a piece of that thin adhesive on the top of this barn because that needs to pop up. And I'll use glue for the bottom of it. But I'm going to figure out where I want all these trees first. So I like to kind of lay my pieces on there, and then I will take them off one by one and glue them down permanently. So I'm varying the colors of my trees. I'm sitting those on top, but I end up tucking everything behind actually. So here you'll see I'm going to cut a piece of that thin foam. I'm going to put it towards the top of the barn because the bottom of the barn is going to sit on the snowy ground there. So I'm going to use some liquid adhesive for that because that part's already popped up. There we go. And I have sped it up a little bit here. So I'm trimming off the trunks of the trees just so I can tuck them down there a little more because that foam adhesive is down there. So I'm limited on how far I can kind of shove them behind the snowy hill here. But that part's going to be hidden, so it doesn't matter. I can trim it off as much as I want. I'm using my tweezers to help me get them in there so I can see what I'm doing. I've become to rely on my tweezers a lot lately. So I wanted that one even shorter, so I just kept trimming it off till I got to the height I wanted. And then I'll add one last tree on the other side. And I like to vary the colors, so I don't have two dark trees or two light trees next to each other. Alright, so I'm going to add one more little element here, and this little snowman is from that Christmas tag set. It doesn't have a die, so I'm going to have to cut it out myself, but it's sized perfectly, I think, to go with this little barn and this little scene. I've stamped a bunch of them out just in case I really mess up my cutting. And I'm going to use my pencils again. I'm just going to color in his nose with the orange, and then I'll just do a little bit of a gray on the side. I don't want to get rid of his white too much. He is still made of snow after all. And you guys really get to see the top of my head a lot in this video for some reason. I wasn't very good at staying out of the way. So I'm just going to fussy cut him out. I am going to leave a border around him, a little thin border of white. That's really going to help cut around the arms of the snowman. So I've put a little piece of thin foam adhesive on the top of his head, and then I'm going to add a little bit of liquid glue to the bottom, just like I did the barn. And we're just going to put him right here on the snowbank as well. Now you can see the moon in my background is a little yellow. I tried to color it with some Copics, and it looked really good at first. There's my little test piece, but then for some reason it absorbed or evaporated. I don't know. It's not very yellow. So I've decided I wanted to make it a little more yellow, so I'm going to add some yellow stickles to it just inside that die cut. And this thing that I have my stickles in is called a Dazzle Caddy, if anyone is curious as to what that is. I have quite a few of them. I like it because I can just pick up the one with the colors I want and put it on my desk. And it holds the bottles upside down. So I'm just going to fill in the moon, and it's just going to make it pop out a little more against the snow and the stars of the die cut. I didn't want it to get lost with everything else. And then here I've got some Stardust stickles, some clear stickles, and I'm just adding a little bit to the roof of the barn to look like it's got some ice and snow on the edges there. Now I don't have a sentiment on the front of this card, but you could have stamped a sentiment maybe across the bottom on that white, but I kind of wanted to leave it without a sentiment, and I can add a sentiment to the inside later. I like it just being a simple scene. So I decided to add a little bit of red rustic twine to the bottom. I thought that went very well with kind of the rustic theme of this card. So this is some May Arts red twine that I'm just going to tie in a little bow at the bottom. And this actually could just be a winter card too. There's nothing that says it has to be Christmas. It's just a snowman on it. So you could change up whatever the sentiment was inside to whatever occasion you needed. And I will just take a little tiny glue dot with my craft knife here, and I put it under that bow so it'll stay in place. So here's our finished card. Who knew that Lawn Fawn in all its cuteness could look more rustic, right? And here's another look. You can see the details and the pencil coloring a little better in these photographs. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.